Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to be playing with fire, but we're going to be safe with it. We're just going to be playing with 3D fake 2D fire. So you can see right here I made this really cool kind of 2D flame effect inside of Cinema 4D, totally inside of Cinema 4D, and it's got the nice 2D shading and stuff, which I'll go over, but we'll break down how I went over this whole entire workflow, and it kind of follows this, so I have the creating cell animation style paint strokes in Cinema 4D, and this workflow kind of led me to the same kind of workflow to get to the cel shaded flame, where we have the same kind of basic setup. So if you didn't watch this tutorial yet, probably would be helpful to kind of get behind my my thought process of how I actually reached this kind of result. So we'll go over how I created the matchstick, very simple, and the flame, and just all the stuff that you can do to kind of add to it and make it your own kind of style. So let's just jump right into this tutorial. Alright, so in my scene now, I just have a matchstick, and that's just made with a cube and a sphere with a little bit of taper on it to create the little, what is that called? The little fire match starter, the head of the match, whatever that is. So that is my match there, and now all we need is a little bit of fire. So all the pyromaniacs out there, we're going to have some fun. So I have interactive render region on. So you can just see that's just rendering what's in my viewport. My camera is set to a parallel projection, so it allows for my scene to look very flat because of the camera projection. And I just have this background with this nice kind of reddish magenta, whatever color that is. So now all we need to do is just create some fire. So what I'm going to do, and like I said before, this is going to follow kind of the same kind of workflow that was in my Cel Shader painting kind of workflow, because we're going to be using Metaball along with some other things to kind of create these flames. So the way Metaball works is you need some balls, you need some spheres, and we're gonna just create a sphere here, and it's gonna be placed right where that the head of our match is right there. So I'm gonna go back into my parallel view here, and I'm just gonna increase the radius here to about 140. Now just give a demonstration on what the Metaball is gonna do and how I kind of arrived to this kind of technique is, let's get a Metaball, and you can see that if I place my sphere in my Metaball, nothing's really happening, but if I place another sphere in that, you can see we're getting this kind of blobby kind of effect. And I'm just going to bring this sphere down. So I figured, alright, if I can get a bunch of these to kind of emit out of this main sphere, we can try to get and recreate this kind of like 2D flame effect. So that's where I started playing around with, alright, let's see if we can get an emitter in here and start emitting smaller spheres from this main sphere and just kind of see if we can get it to work. So that's exactly what I did. So what I'm going to do is just go over to an emitter, grab an emitter here, and I'm going to just take this sphere and let's even this out. I'm very anal when it comes to even values in my objects, so let's just give this sphere radius of 40, and that is going to be our spheres that we will have emitting. And I'm going to turn off the original sphere and the Metaball just so we can see what's going on here. So right now we're not seeing anything because our emitter is facing the wrong direction. We actually need to rotate this 90 degrees so it's emitting and facing up. And we're not seeing any of our spheres except for the one that's in our scene right now because we don't have the show objects turned on. So if we enable show objects, you can see that now we're emitting a bunch of spheres. And if I turn back on my Metaball and my sphere, you'll see that the Metaball basically takes into account all the spheres in my scene, even the ones that are emitted, and creates this big blobby Metaball mess right here. So right now it's very thick. Our mesh is very thick. We need to put it on a diet plan, and to do that, we're going to skinny it up by adjusting our Hall value here. And I'm just going to bring it to a nice round number of 700. And you can see that we kind of have something going on here. Something's definitely happening, but it's very chunky, and that is because of our editor subdivision here. Now what happens is you have the editor subdivision, which is actually the subdivision in your viewport. It's just set up to help optimize your viewport speed, and then you have the actual rendering subdivision. But I like to keep these the same so I can actually see exactly what I'm doing and what it's going to look like when I render it out. So I'm just going to give these a value of 10, so we still have speed in our viewport and we get a lot more detail in our metaball mesh here. So you can see that we're getting a little bit closer. You can definitely see that it's kind of flame-like or something. We definitely have something. So what we need to do is go and start messing around with our emitter here. And first off, we can adjust the birth rate. And I'm going to bring this up to about 35. So we actually have like a steady, constant flow. And you can see that our lifetime is a little bit too high. We actually need to shorten the lifespan of our particles, and we'll just give it to about 60 so you can actually see them end and they just don't keep continuing on for forever. And then the next thing we need to do is, right now the speed is way too slow for a flame, so we really need to jack up the speed of our particles. And so if we give it a value of about 50 or 500, you can see that now we're really getting a sense of this kind of flame. But again, it's just like it looks more like liquid than flame right now, and that's because we need to actually have our flames kind of dissipate and disappear. And we can achieve that by going to our end scale, and this is basically at the end of the lifetime of our particles. What is the scale once it reaches its death time? It's very morbid and sad, but when it makes it to the end, it's going to stay at the same scale because the value is 1. But if we want to shrink it down to nothing, we want it to just shrink and scale down to 0, we just enter 0 here, and you can see that all of our spheres, all of our blobs are turning into nothing and scaling down to 0 at the end of its lifespan here. Cool. So still not looking entirely too close to a flame, so we need to keep working a little bit more here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use another deformer to really, it's going to be night and day difference between this doesn't look like flame and wow, this actually looks a lot like flame. And the thing I got to do that is to kind of smooth everything out and make everything look a little bit more wispy like flames is by using a smooth deformer. And where is it? It always hides from me. Where is it? There it is. And what the smooth deformer does, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group everything into a null, and I'll name this flame. So, okay. So to get this to work, the smoothing deformer to work on everything, I'm just going to place it in the same hierarchy level as our metaball group here. And watch what happens when I put that flame, or that smoothing deformer, on top of everything. You can see immediately, without even really messing with anything, that this looks a lot more flamey. Yes, flamey. And you can see that the smooth deformer is really going to help us go a long way into selling this whole 2D flame effect. So with the smoothing deformer, we can adjust the stiffness, and basically that just kind of adjust how much that smoothing is going down or is affecting our objects. And right now the stiffness is 100, and there's really no difference at all if I turn this on and off. Where you really start seeing the smoothing is if you bring the stiffness all the way down to 0, and you can really see we're getting these nice smooth sharper edges, these nice little wispy kind of flame looks by turning the stiffness down all the way to 0. And basically the iterations on the smoothing deformer is basically controlling the level of the smoothing. So you can see if we get too high, it doesn't look right at all. But what I'm going to do is, I really like how this looks. We're getting this nice wispies, we're getting these nice little pieces of flame that are up here. But right now the smoothing deformer is really just going to town on the actual main part of our flame down here. What I want to do is actually use fall off, so our main flame is basically intact, our metal ball is fairly intact, and then as our metal balls, or as our emitted spheres are going upward, that's when it will start smoothing out. So just so happens that we actually have a fall off on our deformer here, our smoothing deformer. And to do that, I'm just going to go and just grab a linear deformer. I'm going to make it face upward. And what I'm going to do is, actually it's facing the wrong direction. I actually need the smoothing to occur as we're going up. So I'm going to bring the fall off all the way to 100, so it's a big gradient ramp basically of like 0% smoothing to 100% smoothing once it gets to this red plane right here. And you can see that as I move this up, we're actually keeping intact our main large sphere down here that's really making the bulk of the initial flame here. And then the smoothing deformer starts to go to work on the spheres that are emitted and starts applying the 0 to 100% smoothness on our emitted spheres here. So you can see that this is really helping us go a long way. We even get this nice kind of wispy effect, and this is even without adding any kind of like particle effectors or anything like that, because you do have all of these particle effectors, and you can add turbulence, you can add wind if you want to add a little bit of wind to your particles to have this kind of blow in the wind. Let's see if we can get that to work. So let's bring the wind speed to say 100, and you can see that our fan is blowing this way. So I got it on the wrong side, but you can see that by adding these little different particle deformers, we now have our flame blowing in the wind, which is really cool. And again, you have all these different kind of like turbulence is another one that you could use that would help a lot. But that is all available for you because we're working with emitted particles here, and all the particle deformers will help with that. So I think we're looking pretty good right now. We got this nice little flame look. The only thing we need to do is now texture this to look flat in 2D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new texture. Let me actually stop this flame. Let's get it looking. That's a good frame right there. So what I'm going to do is I got a new material. I'm just going to name this flame material. And to get flat materials onto our 2D materials onto our objects, one thing that is that I always love using is part of the Sketch and Tune module, and that is the Cel Shader. And if I apply this to our flame here, if I go to interactive render region, you can see that that is now applying this really flat, just 3-tone texture here, and that is based on the diffuse value on our Cel Shader. And I have a whole tutorial going over the Cel Shader, so I'm really not going to go that in depth into it. But basically, you then choose the colors that you want mapped onto the sky. And right now, it's using the camera as the light source. So if you adjust these knots, you're adjusting how these colors are applied to your 3D object to make it look flat in 2D. So what I'm going to do is blue flames is, I guess that's natural gas, but we're going for the OG flame, the original flame. And so what we're going to do is we'll have a kind of orangish yellow and then a darker orangey kind of color. And you can see that we now have this nice color. And you can even invert these if you want to see how this looks going the other way. So that doesn't really look all that nice, so I'll just undo that. And the one thing I want to do is have this nice kind of rim light effect, and we can achieve that a little bit better by going into back facing here, and you can see we have this nice kind of rim light going on here. And another thing we can do is right now we actually lose our match head here, so we can't actually see anything, and that's kind of the downside of working with 2D, like trying to achieve a 2D kind of look in 3D, is because you're still working with 3D objects, and if an object overlaps or intersects another object in 3D, it's really hard to get around that. Well, in 2D you can layer things up. Right now we can't really layer anything up. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make it so we can actually see into the backside of our flame here. And we can do this a couple ways, but one way to do this is to just go into your transparency and then just use a Fresnel in the transparency and invert it. So now we can actually see the edge of our flame, and that looks kind of cool. But again, it's not very flat looking. I mean, it's kind of stylized 2D, but we don't have nice solid colors like we had before. So another way to do this is to actually use what's called a normal direction. And if I go to, where is it? Here, normal direction. What this is going to do is basically apply a matte. Since we're using it into our alpha channel, we're applying a black and white matte as an alpha. And normal direction is basically a polygon has two sides. And what it's going to do is shade each side of a polygon either black or white depending on which way it's facing. So right now you can't really see any change, but if I go to invert, you can see that I now inverted those the polygon or the normals of how, or not, I didn't invert the normals, but I inverted the colors that are applied to the normals. So the only normal faces we see on our polygons are the polygons that are facing away from the camera. So basically we're seeing the backside of the inside of this polygon. So you can see if I turn that off, basically what's going to happen is you can't see, you're going to see everything facing the camera on the outside of this flame, but then there's the inside, kind of like a double pane glass kind of thing, where I can actually see in, but you can't see out. So by inverting that, we're now seeing like the inside of this object, and everything facing the camera, those original polygons, will disappear. So that's basically how, hopefully that made sense with the normal direction here. I can actually get an actual plane to kind of demonstrate how this is working and apply that same material, and you can see that it disappears. That is because my normal faces facing forward towards the camera are invisible or have alpha applied to it because it's got that black color to it. And again, since it's in the alpha channel, it's using it as a matte. But if I invert this, all of a sudden you'll see that plane because now it's applying the white value to this side of the polygon. And if I can just flip over to the other side, you can see it disappears. So basically we're creating a matte based on these sides or the normals of our polygon, which direction our polygon is facing. So that's a really cool, handy tip there. And again, hopefully that made sense. So we have our alpha, we have our normal direction in the alpha. Now we can actually go back into shading this. So we actually have a nice kind of rim light effect. So we can let's actually switch these. So we want the darker color to be like a rim light on the back, on the edge of this flame. So that's looking pretty cool. And then what we're going to do is just kind of hit play and see what this looks like. And you can see that, this really looks cool. This looks a lot like a flame, like a 2D flame. We got the 2D shading based on our Cel Shader. And another thing we can do is actually, so in the Cel Shader by default, we're actually using the camera as a light source, but you can actually go and use a light as a light source. And right now we don't have any lights in our scene, so let's go ahead and create one. And I like to use infinite light because it's a nice kind of flat light that kind of acts like a sun It's very, kind of disperses light very evenly. And we can kind of adjust the angle of our light. So if I see in my side view here, we're kind of angling downwards. So you can see that not only are we getting a nice shading on the flame, but we're also getting a nice shading on the match head right here. So we got this nice little highlight, this diffuse highlight there. So with our light in our scene, we can actually go back to our flame material, and right now that is a little bit too much of that orange, that darker color. But again, we can just adjust this to have this really nice cool rim light effect, so we just get the nice dark edges on the very outsides of this flame, and that's looking pretty dang cool. So that's basically it to get this nice 2D flame effect. Again, you can adjust all these little values here to either crank up the speed so you get a nice even wispier kind of effect. You can adjust the even the variation of the speed, so you got some chunks of the flame that are going a little bit further. So all this stuff you can really play around with to get a really stylized flame the way you want it. You can even bring down the smoothing to get more chunkier or blobbier kind of flame. It's kind of like a plasma flame or something like that. But yeah, hopefully this equips you to do some nice flat cel shaded 2D flame. And if you want to, so again, this is 3D. So if you look at this from a different angle, you're gonna get this kind of 2D flame. But say you wanted just a flat 2D flame. So what we can do is just simply kind of scale everything down on the Z, and all of a sudden we now have this nice flat flame. So I can move this behind the match, and you can see that we still have a nice little flame effect. We're losing that shading though because of it just being a flat object, so we might have to go back into our Cel Shader here and kind of mess around with the colors there. Or you can kind of just double this flame up and shrink it and put this in front, and so you can see we have like a two-tone kind of flame, and I can actually put this like say this yellow flame color on the second one, on the smaller one, and you can see now we're getting this kind of cool two-tone flame effect there, which is pretty cool. So I'll put like a darker red on there. Let's get this color. Let's just make it bright white so we can actually see the colors here. So by doubling up on those flames, we can actually go into and adjust the seed so it doesn't look exact, so the particles aren't emitting exactly the same. And then now you got this really cool flat, totally flat flame inside of Cinema 4D. That looks pretty dang cool. And you can also adjust to get this lifetime down, so it actually dissipates before the big red flame pieces. So there you go, and then you can actually go in your Metaball and smooth things out even more if you'd like. So say you can bring this down to 7, then that can really smooth things out and you get a totally different look as well. So there you go. That is how I did 2D flames in Cinema 4D using a little bit of Sketch and Tune with the Cel Shader, Metaball, and the smoothing deformer. If you have any questions, be sure to ask me in the comments. Hopefully you guys got that normal direction thing. So it's just shading based on the polygon, sides of the polygon. Just look into normals. Normals is kind of a difficult thing to wrap your mind around, but it's very important kind of concept to use when you're trying to build all this 2D stuff in 3D to actually see into objects or see through objects when they're overlapping in 3D. So, all right, that's done. That's it for me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye-bye.